evening. I'm Christy Max Williams, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the kickoff program of this, the 22nd year of the Arts Cafe Mystic. Thank you. Thank you. So let's cut to the chase. How many of you watched Wednesday night's debate among the Republican candidates for the President of the United States? Whichever side you're on, you have to admit that the debate was great theater. Well, great absurdist theater, if you will. However, and this is no small however, in the midst of the debate, did it occur to you, as it did to me, that we are asked to consider candidates for the highest office in the land based on information provided by the candidates, which would never be sufficient for us to fall in love with someone, much less to marry them. So as we look forward to future debates on both sides of the political divide, consider the moments in your life when you were falling in love with someone. Didn't you want to know, for example, what books they'd been reading? As in, wouldn't you be curious to know what novels Donald Trump or Rand Paul is recently reading? Think about it. Or how about music? Wouldn't you be interested in knowing what music the candidates listen to? Does Scott Walker favor, say, Bach, Beethoven, Bartok? Or imagine if each of the candidates was asked to begin the debate by singing his or her favorite song, which should not be permitted to be God Bless America or the Star-Spangled Banner. Do you remember the first time you heard a lover of yours sing out loud? Didn't that moment tell you something deep about him or her? Something we ought to know about someone who aspires to run the country, don't you think? Or what about poetry? Wouldn't you want to know each candidate's favorite poem? And wouldn't it be simply tremendous if they were asked to read or recite a poem at the conclusion of the debate? Wouldn't that tell us something about these? Imagine what poem Bernie Sanders would recite for us, or Hillary Clinton. Now, tell the truth. Aren't these the kinds of questions you come to the Arts Cafe Mystic for? For those of you somehow new to the Arts Cafe, our mission is to present the nation's most celebrated poets and writers, along with New England's finest musicians, in programs that lift your spirits as they deepen your minds. And if we have a little fun along the way, so much the better. So, on with our show. I have to tell you that I'm very excited to introduce tonight's opening voice poet, Nancy Fitzhugh Maneely. Before meeting her poetic muse, Ms. Maneely had a very grown-up life as a successful teacher, then as a counselor and trainer in drug abuse prevention, and then a 2-decades career with FEMA in Washington, D.C., where she ended up doing support for response and recovery operations. Big stuff. Retired now, she lives among us in Essex, where she devotes time to the Guildford Better Chance program and is a member of the Guildford Poets Guild. 2 years ago, she published a book of poems that changed everything. The book, called Letters from Italy, 1944, contains a series of lyric poems that tell the wartime story and homecoming of the poet's father, who served as a battlefield doctor in the Italian Alps during World War II. The poems, in turn, engendered an oratorio composed in collaboration by Ms. Manili and her sister, Sarah Manili Kidder, and commissioned and performed by the Greater Middletown Chorale. And if you didn't catch those performances of that piece, you may have seen the PBS documentary about it, which was narrated by Meryl Streep and directed by Emmy Award-winning filmmaker Carol Evans. The story told in the poems of Letters from Italy, 1944, is an intrinsically powerful one, but it has been elevated to art by the poetry with lyrical grace, but also with poignant restraint of touch and taste. The poems speak for the soldier father, for his loving wife, and for his daughters. I might add that some of the best of them are as good a poems about domestic life as I've ever seen. These are deeply moving poems, and Letter from Italy is a special book. The kind of poems and book that make you want to read and hear more from this poet. So won't you please join me in welcoming Nancy Fitzhugh Manili.
Well, if I'd heard myself introduced that way, I would want only not to love but to marry my own self. Thank you, Christy. It was beautiful. I'm going to read some poems from Letter from Italy, 1944, but others too. And I'm curious as to whether there are veterans in this audience. Could you say if you are? Okay. Well, I know we're not supposed to say thank you, but I am grateful to the veterans. Yeah. The first poem is from the Letter from Italy book, and as Christy has said, my father was a veteran of the Second World War. He was in the 10th Mountain Division, where he was a doctor, and he served in the Aleutians and then in the Italian campaign in the Italian Alps. And he went into war an innocent, complete innocent, as I think everyone did go into that war. And his first battle was on Kiska Island, where the very first battle fought was between two American sets of troops who didn't know they were fighting each other. There were many casualties. They thought the Japanese were still on the island, and they fought in the middle of the night and killed each other on either side of a hill. That was my father's first battle, and his letter home from there said, I've had enough. But he went on to fight in Italy, and at the end of his war, so that was the beginning of his war in the Aleutians. The end of his war was the day when the Germans laid down their arms in Italy. The day before that, his best friend from their departure from San Francisco to the Aleutians was killed the day before the end of the war. So he came home with invisible wounds, from which eventually he died. He struggled to have a normal life, and eventually 13 or 14 years down the road gave up, just surrendered himself. So this is a poem called A Casualty of War, And I also have to ask you to tell me whether any of you is familiar with a series of books called The Little Golden Books. Everybody? Yeah. Everything from trucks through elephants to the book I had, which was The Little Golden Book of Jesus Christ. And I loved that book. I read that book until the cover turned back into pulp. And this poem is a little bit about that. So, A Casualty of War. To something I asked as he put us to bed, my father said, God only knows. Of this God, I knew little. Grape juice and bread the minister's women cubed in the sacristy. Weekly forgiveness of debtors or trespassers. The back of Wayne Simpson's neck in Sunday school. But Jesus was another thing entirely, my first big crush. It broke my heart, the wave in his hair, his sad blue eyes. The graceful hand that reached out to bless the meek, or better still, swept tables off their feet when he was mad. I couldn't bear the weight of his cross. For me, no resurrection dulled the thorns in my little golden book. But I couldn't envision this Our Father people looked for in the clouds. I asked my own as he turned out the light, who is God? And my own father stopped at the door and sighed without looking back. Much later, I knew that sigh was the offspring of alpine gales, months of the Willowah's moan, and hundreds of soldiers' last breaths. But I believed him when he said, as he studied his slippered feet, there once was a God, but he died. So, good little Presbyterian girl that I was, I kept on singing in the junior choir and going to church every Sunday, but I never was able to come back from that pronouncement, really. So I call myself an atheist, but I'm going to read you a poem which suggests that I may be weakening. This is called The Atheist's Dilemma. I've tried, even prayed, to believe. There came no enveloping warmth, no slamming light, only the soft smother of nothing at all. But there was the whirl of silk at baby Delia's nape. There is a diminished seventh chord. The minute in December when day begins its half-year stretch. There's the red gauze at the tops of early April trees, the sleeves of sleep that lift to fold from underneath. My husband's fingers tendering my wrong way curl around. There's blue enough to make a Dutchman's pants. My child, a length of light, the drift from consciousness and music in my hair. There may be of God in these. I'm going to read this next poem because your featured poet, Major Jackson, is from Vermont. And this is a Vermont poem because the minute I left college, I went to Vermont, upstate Vermont. I went as a teacher and a skier. And the faculty was split in this little tiny town, Waterbury, Vermont, whose only industry was the state mental hospital. The faculty was split between the ones that were over 50 and the ones that were under 28. And this group of people who were under 28, there were a lot of us really. I don't know what happened that year, but three marriages eventuated out of that group. So this is about the least probable of those matches. It's called this is a sex poem, so. What the sophomores know. Shy Mr. McIntosh, big and slowly softening, used himself up for college ball, fell into life as a high school coach. Good-natured, good-looking, and slightly at sea, he paces the field and the echoing gym on feet of incongruous modesty. Miss Fontella is barely contained by the office where she guides the sophomore boys, has outsized feet and thighs that shush each other when she walks. New York City born and bred, she talks in stereophonic bursts with a cheerleader's certainty. Her laugh creates silence, like blasphemy in church. Fontella has McIntosh square in the crosshairs of her love. When they pass in the halls, her eyes slide left, and she crowds the center line, transmitting heat. He does not slow, but sunburn rises on his neck. The older faculty, solid in their otherness, pouch their mouths and look away. But the sophomore boys do not fear to imagine the woman and man engaged in a dance of tussle and heave, buttocks afloat like moons on a rumpled sea, legs like water beasts, breaking the surface, submerging again, his feet submissive to hers. The sophomore boys are not afraid of the nakedness under their teachers' clothes, the bloom of satiety on their cheeks. Now, this is a poem also about a relationship, but it's not such a great one. And it comes from something I heard back in the 70s on NPR, even then, about the astronomer who discovered Jupiter's 14th moon, named Carme, of course, a Cretan goddess. And it occurred to me to wonder about what it must be like to be the wife of an astronomer whose head is in the sky all the time and who works at night. So, from the wife of the astronomer who discovered Jupiter's 14th moon, something luminous and secretive waits in the nighttime sky. My husband, covert in a whirl of star, finds her with his prurient lens. He will name her now, and so she will be his. To me, he brings cold hands down from the cyclopean attic. They're trembling as he comes into our bed, but he is only here to sleep. The rest he has aloft, discovery of fold and fissure, mound and dimple, pleasure that betrays his diffidence. He will not know the way I fear the sky, violent with randomness and full of frigid light, the way I feel about the moon, who draws him to the hope of heat around her radiance, and then beds cold in dawn's pale sky, morning's concubine. Now I'm going to read a couple of seasonal affective disorder poems. The solstices have a big effect on me. As I said in one poem, I favor the winter solstice when light begins to stretch a couple of minutes at a time. I hate the summer solstice because the next day there are going to be 2 minutes fewer of light. So this is the poem, this is a pair of poems. The first one is about the winter solstice. And it's set in Boston at a subway stop, or whatever they call it there now, the underground, I guess. Solstice. Just outside the entrance to the underground, a frozen, ravening man hurls his voice into the crowd of passers-by. He says, "We're no damned good." It's true, we're barely generous inside our scarves and gloves. It's 5 o'clock. Our wallets are a satisfaction we can heft against the longest evening of the year. A woman who commutes in heels pauses in front of him and hurries on. We follow her, eyes down, a single herd he can't unthread. Beyond his voice, we separate, revealed each to the rest. We minimize inside the early dark, concise, complex, and unaccountable. So now this is a poem which is sort of about the summer solstice. It's called Fall Catalogues. I just worked it with my poetry group. It's about the end of summer. In any case, in fraying gardens, greens retreat from leaf and lawn, and minutes falling off the light at dinner time, September makes us wonder if we misremember all that flowed and billowed out of May. And this September promises to slam the summer shut. In mackerel skies, sudden pauses in the insects' shrill, periodic shivers in the crowns of sycamores, and slight bewilderments of sense, we read the news that a storm, her belly full of hot Saharan cloud, is glancing off the southern coast and veers our way, daylight pulsing in her wake. Resigned, we face her likely thefts. At least the undertended annuals that trail from planters on our porch. At worst, the weakest sycamore. At least the underhum of traffic on the pike. At worst, the way from anywhere to here. At least the light of day, at worst good lamplight for the infiltrating dark. But there is loss in any case in summer's ebb, the muted bird song, morning's lesser cherishing. In any case, we might concede that May and June are always partly for regret. And then a couple of poems about my mother and father, who spent the time between his return from Italy till his death trying to figure out what was happening, especially to him. So the first poem is in my mother's voice, and it's her perspective on Dad. It's called Outside In. When you emerged from the winter scrub, balancing logs for our burning, I watched to see if you were glad or if it's workmanlike you plod the way to me. This morning you were shadow at the forest's verge, and something less as you stooped under burdened boughs and slipped inside the forgetful woods where whiteness closed behind. Now you come back, your frozen face pulled into lines of someone old and done with happiness. I open to you, and a thin, cold misery comes in, too. It settles in corners, in chairs, around the words we say, and inside or out is a matter of small significance. And this is a story from my father's point of view. My mother was killer beautiful, and people fell in love with her always. I mean, the guy who pumped her gas was clearly in love with her, even we could tell that. People at the dry cleaners, people in line with her at the drugstore, they all fell for her. She couldn't help it. I don't think she was doing anything, but what did I know? I mean, so we lived on top of a hill with a well which of which we had only one for the first 6 or 8 years of my life. And water was scarce. I remember we took family baths sometimes, had to do that. And this particular summer was a very dry one, the one I'm going to read you about now. So this is in my father's voice. This summer, flowers die still furled on drooping stalks, and apples grow into themselves like embryos. The children gag on water dark as tea, come rusty from the bath. I know the rain will come, but Delia, my mother, calls the dowser in. Saturday, he guides his truck one-handed up the curving drive, slides easily from behind the wheel, and steps in close to her. She asks him something I can't hear. He points across her shoulder, and she tilts her head as if to smell the summer on his warm brown arm. He walks the slow and widening circles of his work, holds the forked divining rod, and listens, he says, to what it knows. He pauses when the alder branch, pulled green from a marsh-side tree, shudders with unanswered thirst. Delia wants to feel what it says. He lifts the rod above her head and lays it in her upturned palms. She holds it with his listening grip, and he holds her the same, guides her to the sweet place in the withered grass. He doesn't know he loves my wife. I turn away to look for rain I smell in a shallow lift of breeze. Watch as mares' tails gather on the Helderbergs and skylight purses shut. The whole day lowers into storm the way I knew it would, heavy with the weight of sun. I let it press me backward to the earth, fasten myself in the clasp of afternoon between the blurring sky and secrets underneath. And then at last, having dealt with God and death and sex, I'm going to talk about poetry. I'm going to read 2 poems about poetry. And the first one is read in honor of every writer I know who keeps a little list or 100 little pieces of paper on which he or she inscribes the words she wants to make sure she gets into a poem or a story one day. So there are 3 words that I had listed for a long, long time that I couldn't find a poem for. So the words were fug, slurry, and duff. So this poem, and this poem is a rondo, which is a form which involves rhyme and meter and repeated lines. So it's not my fault. In fug and slurry, duff. In fug and slurry, duff, I hear the F's and R's. A poet's ear would catch the Kabbalistic sound of darkness, say where someone drowned, a depth and suck inspiring fear. If I were deeper, I'd be clear about obscurity, the sheer delight of certainty unwound in fug and slurry duff. But as for me, I love the mere peculiarity, the weird gymnastics as my tongue moves round the shape of dead things that abound inside the stuff gone soft and queer in fug and slurry duff. And the last poem, also with thanks to my poetry group, is called 6 Easy Rules for the Study of Poetry. 1, take the poem that seems the least like you, that speaks with a voice you can't exactly place, in a language you know your grandmother spoke before its strangeness silenced her. 2, go gently into its mouth. Try to retrieve the shadowy echoes that murmur away from your entry and threaten to disappear. Go with the swallowing. 3. If you scrape at ideas growing there, take freely only of seeds. Don't blow on anything. 4. Be open to chill that coils in warmth, to warmth becoming sound. 5. Descend to the cavern below its heart. Here are the tides absorbing light. Be wary of wanting to see yourself in the pool where others have drowned. Here is the poet. Leave her alone. She is the irritant making a pearl. 6. Depart the poem carefully. The way out may widen or deepen fast or narrow until it's too tight. It's worked of fragile, costly stuff by one who may have learned to hide but can't subdue the need to signify.
Nancy Fitzhugh Maneely, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Nan. Fug, slurry, and dove. I felt the bloom of satiety on your tongue. I'm pleased to announce that until Nan brings forth a new book, we have Letters from Italy 1944 on sale tonight, which I might add includes a CD of the oratorio of the same name. As always, all proceeds go to the author. This gives me a chance to thank our friends at Bank Square Books for their support. Mystic is lucky to have so hip and friendly an independent bookstore. I also want to thank the Mystic Arts Center for welcoming the Arts Café again. Our community is fortunate to have such a resource, and we are glad to be made home here. The Arts Café has presented just about every kind of music you can think of, from rock, folk, and jazz to classical and even opera. And we take pride in our musically adventurous audience. But tonight's musical presentation, as those of you who have caught this act before here, as those of you who know, its presentation defies genre, as it defines delight. Indeed, Nora Fox and Ethan Philbrick are simply a sui generis of inspired music making. But as many of you know, both these young people also embody the local kid makes good story, and both are carrying it several original steps further. Stonington girl Nora Fox's singing and dancing has carried her to the Goodspeed Opera, Madison Square Garden, and all the way to Broadway. Now based in New York, Ms. Fox commands a repertoire spanning American standards, folk pop, show tunes, and sometimes even opera, with an ease and personal grace that makes every song her own. Hailing from Providence, Mr. Philbrick is an accomplished cellist, indeed a doctoral student in performance studies at NYU, who has led participatory art programs in Cincinnati and taken part in cultural diplomacy projects in Pakistan, Mali, Panama, and Guatemala. But as you will hear, their background notes give little insight into the adventurous music they make together. So won't you please let me get on it by welcoming Nora Fox and Ethan Philbrick.
Sing for you. That was written over the Hudson River in Washington Heights in New York on a very dark winter night. Audrey. Here, Paul. Hmm?
Can we announce that it's your ukulele?
Yeah.
Let's do close.
Okay. Faster?
Sorry, God.
Okay. What's
Okay.
next? Okay. Ukulele debut. We just think about, before we come here, what can we do for them that we haven't already done? Because we love playing for you guys so much. And this is another original song. It was co-written by a local, Amelia Golden, who's not here, but I don't know if anyone knows her. She's one of my friends. Yeah. Okay.
When I saw you slip back and walk on over across the pavement, I know what you were saying, though your words had made no difference. Falling over through the waiting, faster finish, release you to the birds you sung and spun out in the forest. A quiet in the night, our voices wouldn't reach the chorus. Bring me back this rope on sleigh, these dragons thirst on me. Walking threadbare through the moss, take good care of your heart. Find yourself somebody new. Just be sure she's good to you. When I saw you sit back and walked on over across the pavement, I know what you were saying, though your words had made no difference. Falling over through the waiting, faster finish, release you to the birds you sung and spun out in the forest. A quiet in the night, our voices wouldn't reach the chorus. Bring me back this rope on sleigh, these dragons thirst on me.
Okay, this next song we're going to do is one of a song that I've been working on over this past year, and it's part of this project where I've been taking a lot of other people's poems and setting them to music. And it's a project that consists of 9 songs, 9 poems by 9 different poets. And the only thing that all the poets share is a certain association with homosexual proclivities and that they are now no longer living. Everything else, they're just utterly different from each other. And so this one, and so the song we're going to perform tonight is a setting of a poem by Audre Lorde called A Woman Speaks. And when I perform these songs, I always force someone in the audience to read the poem before I play it. So tonight is going to be no different. Oh, except maybe my cord is not so long. So if you're in the splash zone up front, you're in trouble. Oh yeah, look, someone is getting pointed to right here. Good, somebody else got to do the bad one.
A woman speaks. Moon marked and touched by sun, my magic is unwritten, but when the sea turns back, it will leave my shape behind. I seek no favor, untouched by blood, unrelenting as the curse of love, permanent as my errors or my pride. I do not mix love with pity, nor hate with scorn. And if you would know me, look into the entrails of Uranus, where the relentless oceans pound. I do not dwell within my birth, nor my divinities, who am ageless, with half-grown, and still seeking my sisters, witches in Dahom. Wear me instead their soiled clothes, as our mother did, mourning. I have been woman for a long time. Beware my smile. I am treacherous with old magic, and in noon's new fury, with all your wide futures promised. I am woman, and not white.
And so with all of the poems in this project, it's very clear that if the poem brings in the first person, it's not going to be the first person of me, but for me and Audrey, there are some political antagonisms that really cross through our various first persons. And so I take on Audrey's I in this poem as an attempt at some kind of solidarity within these times. And so I offer it in the name of Sandra Bland. And this next one is another one from another one of my projects, which is setting as many of Karl Marx's works for chorus as possible. So it's a little thing called Communism Course, trying to keep the dream of a classless society alive. And so this is a setting of the bit of the German ideology, just, 1846, 2 years before Communist Manifesto. And it's this wonderful little bit when him and Marx and Engels are trying to think of what a sort of day would be like without the capitalist division of labor. And I set it to a Bach chorale from the Christmas Oratorio.
Exclusive sphere of activity. Each can become accomplished in any sphere they wish. Society regulates the general production, and thus makes it possible for me to do one thing today and another tomorrow. To hunt in the morning, fish in the afternoon. Rear cattle in the evening, criticize after dinner. Just as I have a mind without ever becoming hunter, fisherman, shepherd, or critic.
Okay. Last tune for you. Any comments?
No, I don't think.
Okay. This one is dedicated to Foxy Blackall, my mother. You don't use this? No.
I know a place where dreams are born and time is never planned. It's not on any chart. You must find it with your heart. Never, never land. It might be miles beyond the moon or right there where you stand. Just keep an open mind, and together we will find never, never land. You'll have a treasure if you stay there. Oh, it's more precious far than gold. Oh, once you have found your way there, you can never, never grow old. So come with me where dreams are born and time is never planned. Just think of lovely things, and your heart will fly on wings forever in Neverland. Woo!
give thanks before we move on to our volunteers. It's their selfless dedication that makes the Arts Cafe go. A special thanks also to our sponsor, the Chester Kitchings Family Foundation, and to our community partners, Bank Square Books and the Whalers Inn, which generously donated lodging for Major Jackson this evening. Lastly, I want to pay homage to those of you in our audience who have made generous donations. Your investment in the Arts Cafe makes the absolute difference in the survival and sustenance of this series, and we thank you. So, on with the show. I've been looking forward to this moment. This evening is a sort of reunion. It was about a dozen years ago the Arts Cafe had the privilege of presenting the poet Major Jackson. And to think that he first aspired to be an accountant. But while studying accounting at Temple University in his native Philadelphia, something happened to Major Jackson. One might say poetry happened. He's since published 4 books of poems which have won him many honors and awards, including the Whiting Award, the Café Canum Prize, a Guggenheim, a Pew. He was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award and twice a finalist for the NAACP's Image Award for Outstanding Poetry. He's been a fellow at the Frost Place and at the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard, and is currently a professor at the University of Vermont and Bennington College. And in his free time, he is the poetry editor of the Harvard Review. His poems have been featured on NPR's All Things Considered, published in the New Yorker, Poetry, Christian Science Monitor, you name it, you see the point. I'd propose to you that there are no Mozarts among poets, no child poet prodigies who learn their art at father's knee and compose masterpieces of verse in their teens. Craft of poetry is learnable, of course, but good poetry comes of an inextricable fusion of learned craft and a human sensibility that seems to require maturity. And we expect such big things of good poetry, big wisdom, big emotion, big insight. And from great poetry, we demand all of this and big originality. The poet's apprenticeship is long, lonely, and comes with no guarantee of mastery. No wonder there are so few good poets and precious few great ones. So it is no surprise that in mid-career, Major Jackson has just published a breakthrough book called Roll Deep, a book that is the fruit of diligent progress and success in his earlier books, but a book that clears important new ground and confirms him as a master poet. It's hard to write a good poem, but wildly difficult to write a whole book of huge poems. Roll Deep is such a book. The best of the poems in Roll Deep speak for us all, speak with calmness and confidence about happiness, outrage, love, death. Speak in celebratory keys about the pleasure and fascinations of being alive. We need our poets to help us grapple with this stuff. Roll Deep is all about this big stuff. And we need our poets to imbue their meditations with a language that is, well, that sings deeply, but also accessibly. In Roll Deep, Major Jackson musters such a voice. But won't you listen for yourself as you join me in welcoming Major Jackson.
It's such a pleasure to be back in Mystic, and I've written a few books since I was last here and gained some pounds. Thank you very much, Christy, for having me back here at the Arts Cafe. And thank you, Nan, for such a fine reading. I feel such kinship in your words, and your sensitivity with your life story is wonderful. And Nora and Ethan, thank you for deepening my musician's envy. Thank you. And I want to acknowledge a few poets. The great joy, I think, in being a writer or an artist is that you are inspired and you find yourself in conversation with the poets who have gone before you or helped pave the way or who are writing at the same time as you. So thank you, Gray, for Brave Disguises. I remember buying that book, and it's good to see Rhonda again, who I think we read together here. And last time I was here, and the great Stephen Dobbins, thank you so much for Cemetery Nights, a book whose humor and intelligence just set bars. And of course, best words, best order. Thank you so much. So someone said it's good luck if you read from each one of your books. And fortunately, I only have 4. So I'm gonna read one from the first 3 and then ease into Roll Deep. When I was a kid, my friends and I, we all went to the same barber, and his name was Mr. Pate. Interesting name for a barber. We used to have this rumor, which was that he never threw hair away after he cut it, that he kept it in jars in the back of his shop like he was a mad scientist. This was in Philadelphia in the 80s, and if you know about urban America in the 80s, it was suffering from all kinds of social and drug epidemics, and that kind of makes an appearance here. I read this poem I stopped reading this poem because there's a reference in here to Jack Johnson. And for some of us, we know that to be a boxer. And for the younger generation, it's a musician. So that kind of, you need to know that that's a boxer, not Jack Johnson, the group. Okay. Mr. Pate's barbershop. I remember the room in which he held a blade to my neck and scraped the dark hairs foresting a jawline, stacks of ebonies and jets, clippings of black boxers, Joe Frazier, Jimmy Young, Jack Johnson, the color television bolted to a ceiling like the one I watched all night in the waiting room at St. Joseph's while my cousin recovered from gunshots. I remember the old Coke machine, a water fountain by the door, how I drank the summer of '88 over and over from a paper cone cup and still cannot quench my thirst. For this was the year funeral homes boomed, the year Mr. Pate swept his own shop, for he had lost his best little helper to crossfire. He suffered, like most barbers suffered, quietly, his clippers humming so loud he forgot Ali's lightning left jab, his love for angles, for carpentry, for baseball. He forgot everything and would never be the same. I remember the way the blade gleamed, fierce in the fading light of dusk, and the reflection of myself panned inside the razor's edge, wondering if I could lay down my pen close up my ledgers and my journals, if I could undo my tie and take up barbering, where months on end a child's head would darken at my feet and bring with it the uncertainty of tomorrow. Or like Mr. Pate, gathering clumps of fallen hair at the end of a day in short, delicate wisps, as though they were the fine findings of gold dust he'd deposit in a jar and place on a shelf, only to return Saturdays collecting as an antique dealer collects, growing tired but never forgetting someone has to cherish these tiny little heads. And the school that I went to, elementary school, in 4th grade, we had a change of teachers because the teacher who we started off with had to go off and have a kid, which is what happens in life. And then we came back from the holiday, and that teacher had to call roll, which she had a very difficult time doing because my generation was the generation that whose parents were very prideful about being black, and so many of my friends had names that were taken from African kings and queens. Well, this teacher had to call roll, and the very first day, it took about 40 minutes for her to get through that roll calling. And so the next day, she just decided not to do that. She gave us all different names. And they were the names of French painters. Some poems are just given to you. They're just, you can't make them up. They're just there. This is from a series called Urban Renewal. Urban Renewal number 17. What of my 4th grade teacher at Reynolds Elementary, who weary after failed attempts to set to memory names strange and meaningless as grains of dirt around the mouthless mountain caves at Bahrain Karai, Tariq, Shaniqua, Amari, Aisha, nicknamed the entire class after French painters, whether boy or girl. Behold, the beginning of sentient, formless life. And so, my best friend Darnell became Marcel, and TT was Brock, and Stacy James was Fragonard, and I, Edouard Chalamon. The time has come to look at these signs from other points of view. Days passed in activity before I corrected her. For Edouard was Austrian and painted the black chief in the palace in 1878 to the question whether intelligence exists. All of Europe swooned to Venus of Willendorf outside her tongue, yet of it in textbooks. Herodotus tells us of the legend of Siswasret, Egyptian, colonizer of Greece, founder of Athens. What's in a name? Sagas rise and fall in the orbs of jump ropes. Hannibal grasps a Roman monkey bar on history's rung. And the mighty heroes at recess lay dead and woe on the imagined battlefields of Halo. Okay, I think I'll just go right to Roll Deep. This is a poem called Why I Write Poetry. I did start off as an accountant, and occasionally I'll look at my bank check, checking account and asked my question, why am I writing poetry? And one morning, this came out, why I write poetry. Because my son is as old as the stars, because I have no blessings, because I hold tangerines like orange tennis balls, because I sit alone and welcome morning across the unshaved jaws of my lawn, because the houses on my street sleep like turtles, because the proper weight of beauty was her eyes last night beneath my eyes, because the red goblet from which I drank made even water a Faustian toast, because radishes should be banned, little pellets that they are, because someone says it's late and begins to rise from a chair, because life is ordinary unless you plan and set in motion a war, because I have not thanked enough, because my lips moisten whenever I hear Mingus's goodbye pork pie hat, because I plant winter vegetables in July, because I could say the morning died like candle wax and no one would question its truth, because I relished being sent into the coat room in 3rd grade where, alone, I would turn off the lights and run my hands over my classmates' coats as if playing tag with their bodies. Because once I shoplifted a pair of Hawaiian shorts and was caught at the Gallery Mall. Because soup reminds me of the warmth of my grandmother and old aunts. Because the long coast of my dreams is filled with saxophones and poems. Because somewhere someone is buying a Rolex or a Piaget. Because I wish I could speak 3 different languages, but have to settle for the language of business and commerce. Because I used to wear paisley shirts and herringbone sports jackets, because I better get it in my soul. Because my grandfather loved clean syntax, cologne, Stacey Adams shoes, Irish tweed caps, and women, but not necessarily in that order. Because I think the elderly are sexy and the young are naive and brutish. Because a vision of trees only comes to wise women and men who can fix old watches. Because I write with a pen whose supply of ink comes from the sea. Because gardens are fun to visit in the evenings when everyone has put away their coats and swords. Because I still do not eat corporate French fries. Because punctuation is my jury and the moon is my judge. Because my best friend in 4th grade chased city buses from corner to corner. Because his father could not stop looking up at the sky after his return from the war, because parataxis is just another way of making ends meet, because I've been on a steady diet of words since the age of 3. The woman who read Audre Lorde's poem is my wife, Dee Dee, so I need to acknowledge her. Thank you, Dee Dee, for being here. That is not an empty thank you. Dee Dee lives in Florida, and I live in Vermont, so lucky us. We're in Mystic, Connecticut. Before Dee Dee and I started our courtship, I did not have fond feelings of Florida. Florida for me was the election of 2000, the election of the Chad. Remember the Chad? Remember that? And, but fortunately, and Disney. But she's shown me a different side, and so I kind of like Florida, as evidenced by this poem, On Cocoa Beach. I am revisiting the idea of Florida, giving my vertebrae a vacation from all the faded bouquets of urine in New York. and the darkened policies of snow in Vermont. I'm revisiting the idea of my wife's imperial gaze. Her 3 cheese quiche and fluted mimosas are the masters of my morning. I'm revisiting the idea of lawn furniture. By late afternoon on Sunday, my face blossoms like a passion of lilies as I admire the spectral grace of the sandhill crane, or am caught lost thinking of Castillo de San Marcos and the first people Temecula. I'm revisiting the idea of light and laughter and skin, half transported by wind. I like to think of myself beside the crepe myrtle, pondering the logos of palm leaves and kindnesses of beaches. You can have your sororities of pain and darkened subways. I will give myself to the great battles of clouds and surfs. So, this is the closest to a sex poem, Nan. It's called Obad, and the poets in the room know that this is a morning song, a morning poem, in the tradition of the Carpe Diem vein. Obad, you could be home boiling a pot of tea as you sit on your terrace, reading up on last night's soccer shot beneath a scarf of Ceres. You could be diving headlong into the waves of Cocoa Beach, or teaching Mao Sing Tong, whose theories are easy to reach. Or dropping off your dry cleaning, making the new Americans wealthier. Or mowing your lawn, greening up. But isn't this healthier? Just imagine the hours you're not squandering away, nor the ant-like minutes frittered with a tentative fiancé. Your whole body agrees you'd rather lie here like a snail in my arms crook, nude and oblivious to all emails. Yes, it's nearly 1 o'clock, but we have more reasons to kiss, to engage in small talk. For one, these blissful seasons are short, and tomorrow is never insured. So bounce downstairs, pour us glasses of whatever, a tray of crackers, Bosch pears, then let drop your sarong, the wind high on your skin, so we can test all day long the notion of original sin. Being a muse is hard work. Everyone knows that. Okay, just several more poems, 3 more poems. This poem takes place in Italy. And my first trip was last summer. And it was very fascinating to read so much about the ruins and to suddenly be there. But always, whenever I travel, I look for, in between the sites, for the real history. You'll hear reference to a pontiff, and this was it's a papal bull, actually, that gave Portugal the rights to West Africa to do what they will, chiefly to spread, of course, Catholicism, but by any means necessary, because it was also during the Crusades. And the name of that papal bull was called Romanus Pontifex. Italy. Cobbled streets have the burnished look of stone skulls, sinking like a necropolis of Ungolinos, from centuries of bewildered tourists stumped in the eternal city, mulling over which way to turn. Every ruin begets a selfie, like a Hollywood set, directed to life, then ditched with each phone's shutter click. Past the bronze facade of the Colosseum, ominous as a chipped gold tooth, other crowds follow like apostles, the voice of a guide, yawning and carrying her flag aloft like a cross. Even here, I look for a history of myself. In the Vatican Museum, I zoom close to art's record, frescoes, sculptures, altarpieces, and war with pilgrims for the best shots, studying the prose of a guidebook to explain Ezekiel's amphora. The slave boy delivering clothes to a nude Pollux, or why every Christ child craves the adoration of a black magus, shades frozen in a single hole. The crumbling stone beneath our feet speaks to us, even Rome's dust possessing something of human grandeur, the elegance of decay. I envy the triumph that certain paintings give back my face, but Romanus Pontifex almost sealed my fate. I have more hills to climb. From every gift shop, Papa waves at his blessed lambs. This takes place in Greece. Every island is filled with loneliness. Every island is filled with loneliness, even Seraphos, where a donkey's eye is a suffering despondent, where Father Macarius makes the sign of the cross as waves arrive like faithful correspondents, and tamarisk trees tender shade like floating coins, and a fisherman slaps his octopus again and again on a stone by the bay of Levadi at dawn. And the dazzling nipples of Americans redden to rusted dials, sharing one sun, where one may take such signs as nature's camaraderie. Except that waitress who cuts her listless eyes so deep, she stakes you to that labeled tourist, as though excess were the body supply at every given place, especially at night when studded lights mend the horizon, where cars zigzag terrace mountains, and what's heard are voices blown for 1,000 years over villas beyond sagebrush that bears your grief so familiar you weep. And 2 poems, remaining poems. Growing up in Philadelphia, there was a notorious gang of chess players. And they were vicious. They were so good that they traveled the world. But they were a rough and tumble bunch and far less privileged than anyone here. And even though I grew up in that same neighborhood, even more so than me, but they were brilliant. So much so that a movie was made about them in Hollywood called The Mighty Pawns. And this is in Philadelphia. But their real names was the Bad Bishops. Mighty Pawns. If I told you Earl, the toughest kid on my block in North Philadelphia, bow-legged and ominous, could beat any man or woman in 10 moves playing white, or that he traveled to Yugoslavia to frustrate the bearded masters at the Belgrade Chess Association, you'd think I was given to hyperbole. And if at dinner time I took you into the faint light of his Section 8 home, reeking of onions, liver, and gravy, his 6 little brothers fighting on a broken love seat, for room in front of a cracked flat screen, one whose diaper sags. It's a wonder it hasn't fallen to his ankles. The walls behind doors exposing sheetrock, the perfect O of a handle, and the slats of stairs missing where baby boy gets stuck trying to ascend to a dominion foreign to you and me, with its loud timbales and drums blasting down from the closed room of his cousin, whose mother stands on a corner all times of the day and night, except when her relief check arrives at the beginning of the month. You get a better picture of Earl's ferocity. After school, on the chessboard, in Mr. Sherman's class, but not necessarily when he stands near you at a downtown bus stop in a jacket a size too small, hunching his shoulders around his ears, as you imagine the checkered squares of his poverty and anger, and pray he does not turn his precise gaze too long in your direction, for fear he blames you and proceeds to take your queen. I lied. I said there was 2 more. Now there's 2 more. Now there's 2 more. This is on disappearing. I have not disappeared. The boulevard is full of my steps. The sky is full of my thinking. An archbishop prays for my soul, even though we only met once, and even then he was busy waving at a congregation. The ticking clocks in Vermont sway back and forth as though sweeping up my eyes and my tattoos and my metaphors. And what comes up are the great paragraphs of dust, which also carry motes of my existence. I have not disappeared. My wife quivers inside a kiss. My pulse was given to her many times in many countries. The chunks of bread we dip in olive oil is communion with our ancestors who also have not disappeared. Their delicate songs I wear on my eyelids. Their smiles have given me freedom, which is a crater I keep falling in. When I bite into the 2 halves of an orange whose cross-section resembles my lungs, a delta of juices bursts down my skin and like magic makes me appear to those who think I've disappeared. It's too bad war makes people disappear like chess pieces, and that prisons turn prisoners into movie endings. When I fade into the mountains on a forest trail, I still have not disappeared, even though its green facade turns my arms and legs into branches of oak. It is then I belong to a southerly wind, which by now you have mistaken as me nodding back and forth like a Hasid in prayer, or a mother who has just lost her son to gunfire in Detroit. I have not disappeared. In my children, I see my bulging face pressing further into the mysteries. In the library in Tucson, on a plane above Buenos Aires, on a field where nearby burns a controlled fire, I'm held by a professor, a general, and a photographer. One burns a finely wrapped cigar, then sniffs the scented pages of my book, scouring for the bitter smell of control. I hold him in my mind like a chalice. I have not disappeared. I swish the amber hue of lager on my tongue and ponder the drilling rigs in the Gulf of Alaska and all the oil-painted plovers. When we talk about limits, we disappear. In Jasper, Texas, you can disappear on a strip of gravel. I am a life in sacred language. Termites toil over a grave, and my mind is a ravine of yesterdays. At a glance from across the room, I wear September on my face, which is eternal and does not disappear, even if you close your eyes once and for all, simultaneously, like 2 coffins. Thank you.
Major Jackson, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Major, and thanks also to Nora Fox and Ethan Philbrick and to Nancy Fitzhugh Maneely. For those of you who would like to take Major Jackson home with you tonight, you can take instead his new book, Roll Deep. We also have a couple of his earlier books. Roll Deep is superb. Don't forget that the Arts Café will return in October with Connecticut State Poet Laureate Rennie McQuilkin. And remember, the Arts Café is a tribute to you. This is community, my friends. And doesn't it feel good?